Nigsberg was a city of teeth. Shattered spires bit into a low, bruise-colored sky. Smoldering skeletons of buildings gaped like broken jaws. The air, thick with the sour, sweet stench of wet ash, decay, and powdered stone, was a breath that choked. It was August 1945, and the victory celebrations in Moscow were a distant, dissonant echo here, in this graveyard of the Third Reich. Captain Lev Orlov moved through the ruins like a shadow with purpose. His boots crunched on a mosaic of debris, broken porcelain, shredded books, twisted metal. His uniform was the only spot of official order in the chaos, but it hung on him like a weight. The scar on his jaw ached in the damp Baltic air, a permanent reminder of a war that was supposed to be over. He was not here as a liberator, nor as an occupier administering order. He was a scavenger, sent to pick at the bones of a legend. His destination rose before him, a monolith of devastation. The Nigsberg Castle, or rather, what was left of it. The great fortress was now a mountainous, jagged wound of blackened stone. The RAF's firestorm and the Red Army's final artillery barrage had collapsed its grandeur into a tectonic pile. It was here, in this specific tomb, that the trail of the Amber Room had gone cold. The photograph from his briefing, that vision of liquid gold and sunlight, felt like a cruel joke here, amidst this absolute, carbonized dark. Orlov's mind, a tool sharpened by years of SMERSH investigations, rejected the obvious. Fire could not have vaporized hundreds of kilograms of amber, gold, and stone. It had been moved, hidden. The mission handed to him in the quiet, oppressive office on Lubyanka Square had been clear. Find the symbol of Russian cultural soul, deny it to the circling Western allies, and in doing so, score an early, decisive point in the silent war that had already begun. Colonel Marchenko's final ominous words echoed. The truth there is buried deeper than any treasure. It was not encouragement. It was a warning. He picked his way over a fallen timber, its end still hinting at a carved grotesque. The local command had provided him with 2 sullen soldiers as guards, but he had left them at the perimeter. Truth was not found with an audience. He needed the silence, the feel of the place. The grand hall was a cathedral of ruin. Part of the vaulted ceiling hung perilously, open to the sky. Birds shrieked as they flew through what was once an enclosed space. Orlov's eyes scanned, not for beauty, but for anomaly. For the story the destruction was trying to hide. He saw the ghost of a massive shape against one soot-blackened wall, a cleaner rectangle where something immense had once stood. The panels. This was the place. He knelt, sifting through the ash and rubble with his gloved hands. It was a gesture of futile hope, but ritual was part of the process. His fingers brushed something hard and smooth, incongruous in the granular charcoal. He pulled it free. It was a chess piece, carved from solid amber. A bishop, about 3 inches tall. It was warm to the touch, almost unnervingly so, as if holding a sliver of captured sunlight. Its surface was smoky, clouded by heat, but the craftsmanship was exquisite. It had not been melted. It had been dropped. A tiny, priceless artifact overlooked in a frantic evacuation. It was his first physical proof that the room had been here and that its dismantling had been rushed, chaotic. As he held the piece, a strange sensation prickled the back of his neck. Not the feeling of being watched, but something else. A pressure drop in the atmosphere, a silence that grew heavier. The light seemed to warp, the gray twilight from the broken roof dimming for a second, as if a cloud had passed. But there were no clouds. For a fleeting, impossible instant, the air around the clean rectangle on the wall shimmered, not with gold, but with a faint, optical distortion, like heat haze off a summer road, a phantom limb of a lost treasure. He blinked, and it was gone. The cold, dead ruin returned. His hand clenched around the amber bishop, its edges biting into his palm. A logical part of his brain dismissed it as fatigue, a trick of the dust-choked light. But another deeper part, the part trained to listen to the unspoken fears of interrogation subjects, recognized something else. It was the feeling of a presence that had just departed. A whisper in an empty room. This was no longer just a political mission, an inventory check for lost property. The chess piece in his pocket was a clue, but the chilling, ephemeral shimmer was a message. He was not just searching for crates and boxes. He was trespassing in a place where something had been violated, and the echo of that violation still lingered. The amber room was not simply lost. It was hidden, and it was guarded, not by men, but by the strange, persistent energy of its own violent history. Orlov stood, his knees cracking. The ruined castle felt suddenly colder, more watchful. He looked from the soot-stained ghost on the wall to the tiny, perfect artifact in his hand. The hunt was no longer abstract. It was personal. He had touched the mystery, and in turn, something intangible had touched him back. The labyrinth had its first thread, and it was leading down. The amber bishop was a secret furnace in his pocket. Its warmth, so alien in the cold damp of Nigsberg, felt less like a physical property and more like a pulse, a tiny, persistent heartbeat of the past. Orlov left the skeletal grandeur of the castle, the sensation of being a specimen under a microscope slowly fading with each step away from that cleared rectangle on the wall. His official base was a commandeered villa on the less damaged outskirts, but the real work would not be done from a desk. He needed voices from the rubble. The list from Moscow contained names, curators, art historians, SS officers attached to the Kunstkommission, the special Nazi looting unit. Some were confirmed dead. Others were in the vast, sprawling network of POW camps swallowing Germany whole. But Nigsberg itself held prisoners, not just in barbed wire enclosures, but in the very cellars and hovels of the shattered city. The survivors, the ones who had hidden during the final storm and now crept out like rats from the foundations of a burned-down house. His first target was not on any list. She was a force of nature, identified by the weary local NKVD commander, with a dismissive wave of his hand. Elsa Brenner, an old crow, a digger, she pokes around the ruins, looking for God knows what. Scrap, food, her dead cats. She knows every hole in this city. A nuisance. But if you want a guide to the graveyard, she's your ghoul. Orlov found her, not by searching, but by letting her find him. He made a show of examining the blown open vaults beneath the castle's north wing, a place where local gossip said the Germans had stored valuables. He moved slowly, deliberately, making noise. He was the bait. He sensed her before he saw her. A prickling on the back of his neck, different from the castle's watchful chill. This was the sharp, focused attention of a predator. He turned. She stood 20 feet away, a statue woven from gray wool and grime. Elsa Brenner was thin to the point of spectral, her face a net of deep lines under a moth-eaten headscarf. But her eyes were young, sharp, and brilliantly blue, cutting through the haze like chips of glacial ice. She held a rusted iron bar like a walking stick, but its end was sharpened to a point. For a long moment they assessed each other in silence. The Soviet officer with the haunted eyes, the German crone with the weaponized stare. Orlov broke the standoff by reaching slowly into his coat pocket, not for his gun, but for a small wrapped ration of black bread and sausage. He placed it carefully on a chunk of fallen masonry. An offering, not a gift. Elsa's eyes flicked from his face to the food and back. She did not move. "You are not here for bricks," she said finally, her voice the sound of dry stones rubbing together. Her Russian was heavily accented but precise. "You are here for the gold room?" The directness was a slap. Orlov kept his face impassive. "What do you know about it?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips, revealing a missing tooth. "I know it screamed when they took it apart. Wood groaning, amber weeping. They felt it. Those clever little men with their white gloves. They worked faster to outrun the sound." Orlov's logical mind catalogued this as superstition, the hysterical projection of a traumatized old woman. But the memory of the shimmer in the castle hall, the warmth of the chess piece, made him hold his skepticism at bay. "Where did they take it?" She shrugged, a bony, angular motion. "They loaded boxes. Many boxes. At night. To the railway station? To the harbor? Eyes see many things, but the brain chooses what to believe." She took a step closer, her gaze locked on his. "You have a piece of it. You carry its heat. It is a small piece, but it is listening." A cold that had nothing to do with the Baltic climate shot down Orlov's spine. His hand instinctively went to his pocket, feeling the outline of the bishop through the fabric. He had told no one. Elsa saw the minute reaction, and her smile widened, becoming something ancient and unnerving. "I will show you the places the bombs did not find. The deep places, the old places. Not for your food," she said, nodding at the ration. "For a different price." "And what is that?" "You will tell me when you find it," she said, her blue eyes gleaming. "You will tell me if the screaming has stopped." It was an impossible, irrational bargain. Yet, in the economy of this broken world, it made a perverse sense. She was trading local knowledge for a metaphysical report. Orlov, the ultimate pragmatist, found himself nodding. The labyrinth required a guide, even if she was half mad. Her first revelation was not a tunnel or a vault, but a man. As twilight bled into the ruins, painting everything in shades of iron and blood, she led him through a crack in a seemingly solid foundation wall into a cellar that smelled of damp earth and stale fear. Crouched in the corner, wrapped in a torn Wehrmacht greatcoat, was a man, young, hollow-cheeked, shivering with fever or terror. His left shoulder was a mess of stained bandages. "This is Willie," Elsa stated, her voice flat. "He was a driver, for the commandant. He saw things his brain could not unpin. Now it is stuck." Orlov approached slowly. The man, Willie, flinched, his eyes wide and unfocused, rolling in their sockets. He was muttering in a low, rapid stream of German. Orlov caught fragments. "Nicht die Kisten, die anderen Orge," not the crates, the other coffins, and a repeated guttural phrase, "Das voll Stern in den Steinen," the whispering in the stones. Orlov knelt, keeping his distance. He didn't interrogate. He observed. The man's trauma was a vault, and brute force would only seal it tighter. He took the amber bishop from his pocket. He didn't offer it. He simply held it in his palm, letting the faint, dying light from the cellar entrance catch its cloudy depths. Willie's muttering stopped. His frantic eyes locked onto the piece of amber. His breathing hitched. The recognition was instant and visceral. He began to rock back and forth. "They took the walls. They took the light," he whispered in ragged Russian, learned perhaps from some Eastern Front horror. But the soul would not go in the box. It stayed. It bled into the castle stones. And then the architect came. Orlov leaned forward, every muscle taut. What architect? Willie's eyes filled with a profound, lucid terror. Not a builder of houses, a builder of forgetting. He came with the last train. He looked at the empty space where the gold walls lived, and he smiled. He said it was perfect. Before Orlov could press further, Willie let out a choked gasp and curled into a ball, his words dissolving back into incoherent whimpers. Orlov stood, his mind racing. The architect, a new player, not a curator or a soldier, but something else, a specialist in erasure. Elsa watched him from the shadows, her expression unreadable. As they emerged from the cellar into the oppressive twilight, the ruins of Kate Nigsberg seemed to have shifted. They were no longer just a crime scene. They were a patient, and Orlov had just detected a second, more profound illness beneath the surface wound. He had a guide who spoke in riddles of screaming amber, and a witness broken by a whispering darkness. And somewhere in the shadows of this shattered city, a man called the architect was smiling at an empty space. The hunt was no longer a search. It was becoming an exorcism. The name was a poison seed planted in Orlov's mind, the architect. It festered there, growing thorns of urgency. Willie, the broken driver, had retreated into a catatonic shell, his well of terror tapped dry for now. Elsa, when pressed, only offered a grim, knowing shake of her head. "He is a ghost who leaves fingerprints," she muttered cryptically. "He walks through walls of paperwork and memories. To find him, you must look not where things are, but where the records of them are not." This led Orlov from the visceral, smelling ruins to a different kind of desolation. The shell of the Nigsberg University Library. The grand reading room was a surreal tomb. The ceiling was partly gone, allowing a gray, weeping sky to look down upon a sea of charred paper and exploded bookshelves. Airstrikes and fire had done their work, but not completely. In a testament to German bureaucratic obsession, one wing of the basement archives had survived, protected by thick vault doors now blasted open by Soviet sappers seeking intelligence, not incunabula. This was the domain of Dr. Alfred Rode, the name at the top of Orlov's Moscow list, the former curator of the Nigsberg Castle collections, the man who had officially signed for the Amber Room upon its arrival from Tsarskoye Selo, the logical custodian, the obvious suspect. Orlov found him in a subterranean cell that had once been a document restoration room. The air was cold and carried the ghostly scent of old leather, mold, and chemical preservatives. Rode was a scarecrow in a tattered, once fine suit. He was painfully thin, his skin stretched taut over a scholar's skull, his eyes magnified behind round, wire-rimmed spectacles. He did not look up as Orlov entered, his attention seemingly absorbed by carefully reassembling a singed parchment with a surgeon's delicacy. The performance was too perfect, too staged. This was a man who had prepared for this interrogation for months. Orlov did not sit. He placed his file on the table but did not open it. He began to circle the room slowly, a predator inspecting a trap. He let the silence stretch, broken only by the drip of water somewhere in the darkness and the soft crackle of Rode's parchment. "Your amber room burned," Rode stated finally, his voice a dry, papery rustle, still not looking up. A tragic casualty of war, the great fire in the castle during the bombardment. Amber is resin, Captain. It is fuel. A glorious, unique bonfire. Poetic, in its way. He spoke the lines with the flat cadence of a memorized confession, a story rehearsed to the point of meaninglessness. Orlov stopped circling. He reached into his pocket and placed the amber bishop on the table beside Rhodes' work. It landed with a soft, definitive tap. The effect was electric. Rhodes' meticulous hands froze. A minute tremor ran through his fingers. For the first time, his eyes left his work and flicked to the chess piece. In that instant, Orlov saw not fear, but something far more disturbing. A fanatical, possessive glint, a flash of raw hunger that was instantly smothered behind a veil of academic detachment. The connection was real and profound. "It did not all burn," Orlov said, his voice low and steady. "Fragments remain. Witnesses remain. They tell a different story, a story of boxes, of trains, of an architect." At the last word, Rhodes went very still. The carefully constructed persona of the defeated pedantic scholar hardened into something else. He slowly removed his glasses and polished them with a shred of his shirt tail, a deliberate, stalling gesture. When he replaced them, his gaze was different, sharper, colder, devoid of pretense. "You are digging in the wrong stratum, Captain," Rhodes said, his voice now devoid of its rustle, becoming chillingly clear. "You seek crates and cellars. You are thinking like a quartermaster. The amber room was never merely property. It was a phenomenon, a concentration of time, of light, of imperial will. You cannot crate a phenomenon. You can only transmute it or erase it." He leaned forward, and the dim light from the single bare bulb gleamed on his lenses, turning his eyes into two white, blank circles. The man you call the architect understood this. He did not come for the amber. He came for the idea of it. His task was not logistics, but metaphysics. To unravel the story, to scatter the narrative so completely that no one could ever piece it back together. A sunken ship? A collapsed mine in Thuringia? A secret train to the Alps? He would have planted seeds for all these tales, each one plausible, each one a dead end, leading into a wilderness of speculation. Orlov felt the ground of his investigation shift beneath him. Rhodes was not lying to protect a location. He was philosophizing to explain a disappearance. This was a new level of obfuscation. "And your role? The custodian?" Rhodes smiled, a thin, bloodless stretch of lips. "My role was to bear witness to the end, to certify the transition from object to myth. I was the notary of forgetting. And I can tell you, Captain, with absolute certainty, that you will find only echoes. The amber room, as you imagine it, is gone. It has been deconstructed. Its physical form is one with the chaos of this city. Its essence, that is a different matter." He gestured vaguely toward the ceiling, toward the ruined city above. "It is in the anxiety of the stones, in the nightmares of men like your driver. It is the unease you feel in the castle cellar. The architect did not hide a room. He unleashed a ghost, and ghosts are notoriously difficult to repatriate to Moscow." The interrogation was over. Orlov had not gotten a location. Instead, he had been given a manifesto. Rhodes had reframed the entire mission from a treasure hunt into a spiritual crisis. He was either a brilliant liar using psychological warfare, or he was revealing a terrifying, deeper truth. As Orlov retrieved the bishop and turned to leave, Rhodes' voice stopped him, softer now, almost conversational. "A word of caution, Captain. When you chase a ghost, you must be careful it does not begin to chase you. It starts with small things, a warmth in your pocket that shouldn't be there, a shadow that moves against the wind, a whisper you hear only when all other sound has faded. The phenomenon has a residue, and it adheres. Orlov left the icy cellar, Rhodes' words clinging to him like cobwebs. The architect of forgetting had built a maze of doubt in his mind. But as he stepped back into the ravaged street, the amber piece heavy in his grip, he made a decision. He would not play Rhodes' philosophical game. He would find the architect. Every ghost has a maker, and every maker leaves a trail, not of myth, but of mundane, traceable decisions. He needed to find the one inconsistency in the story, the one fingerprint the meticulous architect of forgetting had failed to wipe clean. The hunt had just turned from a physical search into a battle for the very narrative of the truth. Rhodes' intellectual poison did its work. For 2 days, Orlov moved through Königsberg like a man doubting his own shadow. The city's whispers seemed amplified, the groan of shifting rubble, the distant cry of gulls, the low murmur of the Baltic wind through broken windows. He caught himself staring at mundane shadows, waiting for them to shimmer. The amber bishop in his pocket no longer felt like a clue, but a tracking device implanted by the phenomenon itself. Rhodes had succeeded in part. He had infected the hunt with metaphysical vertigo. To fight a ghost, Orlov needed paper. Not philosophy, but records. Orders, manifests, transportation logs, the dry bureaucratic skeleton of any military operation, no matter how esoteric its goal. The architect might have been a builder of myths, but he would have needed trains, trucks, fuel, and men. Those things left trails. Elsa, true to her word, was his key to the city's hidden veins. She led him not to grand bunkers, but to forgotten offices. A waterlogged freight station master's hut buried under a collapsed warehouse, the soot-blackened records room of a railway switching yard, the cellar of a bombed-out postal administration building, where invoices had blown against the walls like fungal growths. They sifted through sodden, crumbling paper, their fingers growing numb, their world reduced to the circle of light from Orlov's hurricane lamp. The air in these tombs was thick with spores and the ghosts of ink. Elsa worked with a grim, relentless efficiency. She was not looking for the amber room. She was hunting for the anomaly. "Look for the order that does not belong," she rasped, her breath frosting in the lamplight. The train that goes nowhere. The shipment with a name, but no listed contents. The authorization signed by a department that should not exist. It was in the postal cellar that Orlov's hands, sorting through a box of water-stained Wehrmacht logistical forms, found the incongruity. It was a single sheet, slightly less brittle than the others, protected by being sandwiched between 2 sheets of carbon paper. It was a transportation requisition order, dated January 1945, the frantic, final weeks before the Soviet siege tightened. It authorized the priority use of a specialized Kraftfahrzeug, motor vehicle, and a classified driver from the Technische Nothilfe, the Technical Emergency Corps, a unit often used for sensitive, non-military engineering projects. The cargo was listed cryptically: Sonderby, Lilter, fragile, climasensitive. Special containers, fragile, climate-sensitive. The destination was not a railway station or a dock. It was a map grid reference and a single word: Feste, fortress. But it was the authorizing signature that made Orlov's heart stutter in his chest. It was not a scrawl, but a precise mechanical stamp. and above it, typed neatly, was the title, Sonderbeauftragter F.R. Kulturelle Deconstruction, Special Commissioner for Cultural Deconstruction. The architect had a title, and he had left a fingerprint. Orlov traced the grid reference on a captured German tactical map, spread on Elsa's makeshift table in her squalid cellar dwelling. His finger landed not on one of the massive modern forts that ringed Cape Nigsberg, but on an older, smaller notation, Feste 3, Fort 3. A 19th-century bastion, part of the city's earlier defensive ring, long considered obsolete, buried in overgrowth on the northern outskirts. A perfect place to hide something in plain sight. A forgotten lockbox in a forgotten corner of a dying city. "This is it," he said, the words tasting of coal dust and adrenaline. Elsa peered at the map, her blue eyes reflecting the flickering candle flame. Feste 3. The earth there is soft. It swallows sound. The soldiers called it the Whispering Fort. They said the old brickwork hummed. Before Orlov could process this, a new, urgent problem arrived. One of the young soldiers assigned to him appeared at the cellar entrance, his face pale under his helmet. "Captain, a report from the commandant's office. The prisoner rode. He is dead." Orlov felt a cold fist clench in his gut. "How?" The soldier shifted uncomfortably. "Heart failure, they say. In his sleep. The doctor found him this morning. But the orderly said the room was ice cold. And the man, he was smiling. A coincidental death of a sickly, malnourished prisoner was plausible. The chilling temperature, the smile, these were details that could be exaggerated, the stuff of guardhouse gossip. But the timing was flawless. Rode had just given his performance, had just laid out the chilling philosophy of the hunt. And now he was eternally silent. It was too neat. It felt less like an end and more like a punctuation mark, a period placed by the same hand that had authored the deconstruction. The architect was not just a phantom in old reports. He was active. He was cleaning house. Orlov was suddenly, acutely aware that he was not just a hunter. He was a loose end, a man with a map coordinate and a title. Rode's warning echoed, "When you chase a ghost, you must be careful. It does not begin to chase you." The mission was now a race. He had to reach Fort 3 before the trail was erased for good, or before the ghost decided to actively intervene. He assembled a small, hand-picked team, 2 of his most reliable sappers, men who had cleared mines from Stalingrad to Berlin, and a stoic, silent driver. He did not tell the local NKVD commandant the specifics. Trust had evaporated with Rode's death. As his Gaz 67 Jeep bounced through the cratered streets towards the northern outskirts, the ruins gave way to a blighted, overgrown no-man's land. The sky darkened prematurely, heavy with the promise of rain. The amber bishop in his pocket felt like a burning coal, a beacon. He was no longer searching for a hidden treasure. He was driving towards the lair of the thing that had devoured it, following the only solid fingerprint left by the architect of forgetting. The labyrinth had finally revealed a door, and behind it, in the whispering dark of an obsolete fort, something waited. Not gold, not jewels, but the answer to what happens when a nation's soul is not stolen, but meticulously, scientifically, unmade. Fort 3 rose from the damp earth like the fossilized skull of a prehistoric beast. Its low, grass-covered ramparts and crumbling brick archways were half swallowed by brambles and skeletal birch trees. It was not imposing in a military sense, but in a visceral, primordial way. It felt like a place that had been waiting, patiently, for a very long time. The air was noticeably still and heavy, the sounds of the distant city utterly smothered. Elsa's words echoed, "The earth here is soft. It swallows sound." Orlov and his two sappers, Petrov and Mikhailov, stood before the main entrance, a dark, arched throat leading into absolute blackness. The driver remained with the jeep, his orders to sound the horn at any sign of trouble, a flimsy lifeline to a world that already felt miles away. Petrov, a broad man with calm eyes, lit a powerful storm lantern. The yellow light pushed against the gloom, revealing a tunnel lined with slick, weeping bricks. The air that flowed out was cold and carried a complex scent: wet stone, decayed wood, and something else. A faint, almost electrical tang, like the air after a lightning strike. They moved in, their footsteps unnervingly muffled by the soft, muddy floor. The beam of the lantern carved a fragile bubble of vision in the pressing dark. The fort was a honeycomb of empty gun casemates, collapsed storerooms, and narrow, twisting corridors. It was a void. There were no crates, no signs of recent occupation, no trace of the special containers, only decades of neglect and the slow drip of groundwater. Orlov felt a creeping sense of futility. Had the requisition order been a ruse, another layer of misdirection planted by the architect? Was this the dead end Rode had promised? They descended a rusted iron staircase to a lower level. The cold intensified, biting through their greatcoats. Here, the silence was not just an absence of noise. It was a palpable presence. It pressed on their eardrums. Petrov held up a hand, his breath a white plume. "Captain, do you hear that?" They stood frozen, listening. At first there was nothing. Then, not a sound, but a sensation. A low, subaudible vibration that traveled up through the soles of their boots. A deep hum that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. The old brickwork hummed. Mikhailov, the younger sapper, crossed himself instinctively. "It's the wind in the vents," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. There was no wind. Orlov pushed forward, drawn by something deeper than logic. The hum was a thread. They followed a central corridor that sloped gently downward. At its end was a heavy, riveted iron door, streaked with orange rust. It was ajar. Petrov trained his lantern on the gap. Beyond was not another ammunition room, but a vast, circular space, a subterranean cistern or a central hall for mustering troops. The light could not find its far walls. It was swallowed by a darkness that seemed thicker than mere shadow. They stepped inside. The chamber was not empty. In the very center of that immense dark space, standing alone on the muddy floor, was a single object. It was an ornate, towering frame carved from dark, aged wood and adorned with gilded flourishes that gleamed dully in the lantern light. It was empty, a void within a void. Orlov approached, his heart hammering against his ribs. He recognized the craftsmanship, the scale. It was one of the Florentine mosaic frames that had housed a central panel of the amber room. It had been removed, carefully, and brought here, not as treasure, but as a relic, a signpost. He placed a hand on the cold gilded wood. The moment his fingers made contact, the sub-audible hum in the fort shifted. It didn't get louder. It coalesced. For a terrifying, beautiful second, the empty space within the frame seemed to curdle. The air thickened, shimmering like a heat haze, and for a flicker less than a blink, it held color. A swirl of gold and honey-entrapped sunlight, a phantom limb, a memory made visible. A scent of pine resin and warm stone flooded his senses, instantly gone, leaving only the damp decay. Petrov gasped, stumbling back. Mikhailov dropped his toolkit with a deafening clatter that echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. The vision vanished. The frame was just a frame again, sitting in a pool of muddy light. But the proof was seared into Orlov's mind. Road was wrong. The phenomenon had not been scattered. It had been concentrated here, in this forgotten, resonant space. The architect hadn't just hidden the pieces. He had staged a ritual of erasure, using the fort's acoustics, its isolation, as a crucible. This empty frame was an altar to absence. Orlov's lantern beam swept the floor around the frame. There were no drag marks, no footprints besides their own. It had been placed with impossible care, as if lowered from the ceiling. Then the light caught something else, partially buried in the muck near the base of the frame. Not amber, but paper. He knelt, carefully extracting it. It was a sheet of high-quality drafting paper, protected in a transparent oilskin sleeve. It was perfectly dry. On it was not a map, but a precise geometric diagram. It looked like an architect's schematic, but of no building Orlov recognized. It was a series of concentric circles, intersecting lines, and strange angular symbols in the margins. At the bottom, in the same precise mechanical script as the requisition order, was a title: Resonance Muster, Project Y. Resonance Pattern, Project Y, Y for Yantar. Amber. This was the architect's blueprint. Not for hiding, but for unmaking. The fort, the frame, the hum. It was all part of a machine designed to dismantle not just a physical object, but its very essence, its historical echo. As he stared at the diagram, the cold in the chamber deepened sharply. The lantern flame guttered. From the darkness beyond their pathetic circle of light, from the dozens of black, empty corridor mouths leading out of the chamber, they heard it. A whisper. It was not one voice, but a chorus of faint, overlapping sighs, as if the stones themselves were exhaling words just below the threshold of comprehension. It was the sound of the silence breaking its vow. Petrov's face was a mask of primal fear. Captain. The voices. Orlov stuffed the diagram inside his tunic, next to the warm amber bishop. The two objects, one cold intellect, one warm memory, burned against his chest. He had found the architect's workshop. But the workshop was not abandoned. The machine, whatever it was still active. It was whispering. And now it knew they were there. The hunt was over. They were no longer searchers. They had become intruders in a living, breathing process they did not understand. They had to get out. Now. The drive back from Fort 3 was a silent, frantic escape through a nightmare. The whispering did not stop at the fort's threshold. It followed them, a psychic tinnitus ringing in the inner ear, a chill that had settled deep in their bone marrow. Petrov drove the Gaz-67 with grim, white-knuckled focus, swerving around craters as if demons nipped at the tires. Mikhailov sat in the back, clutching his toolkit, his eyes wide and darting, scanning the ruins they passed as if expecting the very bricks to form mouths and speak. Orlov held the diagram against his chest, the parchment feeling less like paper and more like a live electrode, humming with stolen energy. He had touched the void. He had seen the ghost in the machine. Rhodes' philosophical poison was now a proven, terrifying reality. The amber room had not been stolen. It had been subjected to a metaphysical execution in that whispering, resonant chamber. And the echo of that execution was now a free radical, clinging to them, to the diagram, to the bishop in his pocket. They did not return to the villa. Orlov knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic, that it was compromised. The architect was cleaning house. Road was dead. The fort was a silent, screaming witness. He was next. He directed Petrov to a half-collapsed brewery on the city's eastern fringe, a place of vast, echoing vats and catacombs of kegs, known only to Elsa's network of survivors. It was a place to hide from both his own command and the unseen enemy. In the damp, yeasty darkness of a cellar, by the guttering light of a single candle, Orlov spread the diagram on a barrel top. The geometric design was not just a plan, it was a key. The concentric circles were not architectural. They were symbolic, perhaps harmonic. The symbols in the margins were not German, nor any alphabet he knew. They were stark, angular, reminiscent of runes but stripped of any historical context. A cold, modernist sigil. Resonance muster. This was the blueprint for turning history into noise. Elsa materialized from the shadows, drawn by their return as a vulture is drawn to tremors of death. She looked at the diagram, then at Orlov's face, and her own aged features tightened with a grim understanding. "You opened a door that was meant to stay closed," she whispered, her voice blending with the faint, persistent whisper in his own skull. "The machine is still on. You cannot just unplug it. You have become a part of its circuit." Before Orlov could demand she explain, a new sound sliced through the brewery's silence. Not a whisper, a footstep, a single deliberate crunch of grit on concrete from the floor above. It was wrong. The brewery was a known ruin, shunned. Petrov and Mikhailov froze, hands going to their sidearms. Orlov extinguished the candle with a pinch, plunging them into a blackness so complete it felt solid. They waited, barely breathing. The footsteps did not continue in a search pattern. They moved with a dreadful, unhurried precision. Click, crunch, pause, click. Descending the metal staircase to the cellar level. Each step was an ice pick of sound in the silence. This was not a patrol. This was a delivery. A beam of light speared the darkness, not the wide, yellow wash of a lantern, but the intense, focused blade of a modern electric torch. It swept across the room, clinical and dispassionate, ignoring the hiding places, and came to rest directly on Orlov's chest, as if it could see the diagram through his tunic. The figure holding the light was a silhouette in the doorway. Tall, thin, wearing a long, dark coat that was too clean for Nigsberg. He wore no insignia, no hat. His face was in shadow, but Orlov could feel the weight of his gaze. "Captain Orlov," the man said. His voice was calm, mid-range, utterly devoid of accent or emotion. It was the voice of a radio announcement. "You have acquired property that does not belong to you, the diagram, and the sample. The architect." He had not waited to be found. He had come to collect. Orlov's mind raced, cold and clear. This was the moment. The ghost had stepped into the light. "It belongs to the Soviet people," Orlov said, his own voice rough from dust and tension. A soft, dry sound came from the silhouette. A laugh that contained no humor. "The Soviet people? You are looking at this through the wrong lens, Captain. This is not about ownership. It is about hygiene. Some memories are pathogens. Some beauties are tumors. My work was a surgical removal. You are attempting a dangerous reinfection." The torch beam shifted slightly, illuminating the man's free hand. It held not a weapon, but a small, polished metallic case, like a doctor's instrument kit. "Give me the diagram. Give me the amber piece, and you may walk out of this city. You will forget the whispers. They will become just a headache, a consequence of stress. Continue, and you will become a vessel for the static. You will carry the scream of a disassembled masterpiece in your mind until it erases everything else that you are. Is that the treasure you wish to bring home to Moscow? The offer was terrifying in its plausibility. This man spoke not of death, but of a fate worse, curated madness, a tailored emptiness. He was offering Orlov a clean, silent prison in exchange for his soul. Orlov's hand closed around the amber bishop in his pocket. It was pulsing with a feverish warmth. In that moment he understood the true bargain. The architect dealt in erasure, in perfect, silent nothingness. The amber room, even as a ghost, even as a scream, was something. It was a memory, a truth, however painful. To surrender the pieces was to become an accomplice to the murder of history. No, Orlov said. The silence that followed was heavier than the forts. The architect's silhouette gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if confirming a disappointing diagnosis. A pity. You had a precise mind. It will be interesting to hear what becomes of it. He did not attack. He did not need to. He simply switched off his torch. Total darkness returned. But it was a different darkness. It was charged, hostile. The whispering in Orlov's head swelled, not in volume, but in clarity. For a second it wasn't a sigh, but a word. A single, guttural, ancient-sounding syllable that meant nothing and everything. When Petrov relit the lantern seconds later, the doorway was empty. The architect was gone, leaving only the echo of his presence and the terrible amplifying silence that now felt like a held breath before a storm. He had not come to fight. He had come to issue a sentence, and he had left the sentence hanging in the air, to be carried out by the very phenomenon Orlov was trying to capture. The hunt had reached its endgame. He was no longer the hunter or the intruder. He had been marked as the next subject for deconstruction. The sentence was passed, and the sentence was silence. But not an absence of sound, a corruption of it. In the hours after the architect's visit, the world began to fray at the edges for Orlov. The whispers from the fort were no longer a distant chorus. They had taken up residence inside his skull, a constant, low-grade static, like a detuned radio buried deep in his brain. It was the scream of a disassembled masterpiece the architect had promised, and it was slowly, meticulously, scrubbing away his sense of reality. He could no longer trust his senses. The amber bishop in his pocket would sometimes flare with a heat so intense he expected to find his skin blistering, only to feel it ice-cold to the touch a moment later. The diagram, which he had hidden separately, seemed to exert a gravitational pull, a faint, subsonic thrum he could feel in his teeth if he got within 10 feet of it. He saw movements in the periphery of his vision, shimmers of gold in piles of gray rubble, the fleeting outline of an ornate frame in a broken doorway that dissolved when he turned his head. Kate at Nigsberg was no longer a ruined city. It was a haunted palace of his own deteriorating mind. Worse than the hallucinations was the erosion of memory. He would snap back to awareness, unsure of how much time had passed, standing in the middle of a street with no recollection of walking there. The names of his sappers, Petrov and Mikhailov, sometimes slipped from his grasp, replaced by hollow placeholders. He caught himself staring at his own reflection in a shard of broken window, struggling to recognize the gaunt, shadow-eyed man staring back. The architect's threat was not empty. He was being unmade, his identity dissolved by the resonant chaos he had courted. Elsa watched his deterioration with the grim focus of a field medic watching sepsis set in. She did not offer comfort. She offered a brutal, stark choice. "He is using the pattern," she stated, pointing a bony finger at his temple. "The diagram is a key, and the amber piece is the transmitter. Together, they tune you to the frequency of the broken thing. You are becoming a human resonator for the ghost. You must break the circuit." "How?" Orlov asked, his voice sounding thin and distant in his own ears, competing with the static. "You cannot outrun a frequency. You must change the station. You must give the ghost a voice that is not your own mind. Or you must go to the source and break the machine." The source. Fort 3. The whispering heart of it all. The idea filled him with a dread deeper than any frontline bombardment. Returning there felt like willingly walking into his own execution chamber. But the alternative was to slowly dissolve into a static-filled shell, a walking monument to the architect's victory. His official mission was in tatters, a terse, coded signal from Moscow, intercepted by a loyal radio operator, demanded an immediate update. The tone was impatient. Success or failure. Resources were needed elsewhere. The state's patience, unlike the ghost's, was finite. He stood at a precipice. Obey the recall and return to Moscow a broken man, carrying the psychic poison with him, or commit a final, desperate act of insubordination. The decision was made for him in the middle of a sleepless night. He awoke, or surfaced from a blank fugue, to find himself not in his cot, but standing in the brewery cellar, the amber bishop in one hand, a piece of charcoal from the stove in the other. On the brick wall before him he had drawn, with shocking geometric precision, a perfect replica of a segment of the resonance pattern. He had no memory of doing it. The machine was using his body as its instrument. That was the final push. He could not let this out. He could not become a carrier. He made his preparations with a cold, clinical detachment that felt like his old self breaking through the static for one last performance. He gave Petrov and Mikhailov sealed orders to deliver to the local commandant, orders that would absolve them of any blame, citing his own disappearance as lost in action during a solo reconnaissance. He handed the original diagram to Elsa, with strict hissed instructions. If he did not return by dawn, she was to burn it. It was too dangerous to exist. He kept only the amber bishop. It was the bait, the transmitter, and his only tether to the truth. Alone, under a moonless sky that felt like a black lid on the world, he drove back to Fort 3. The static in his head rose to a fever pitch as the ramparts loomed, a chorus of angry wasps now, buzzing with malign intelligence. The fort wasn't just humming, it was waiting. It had tasted his fear, his curiosity, his memory, and now it was hungry for the rest. He entered the tunnel, his flashlight beam trembling not from his hand, but from the distortion in the air itself. The cold was physical, a slap that stole his breath. He moved faster now, a man walking to his own firing squad, drawn by a perverse gravitational pull. He descended to the central chamber. The empty frame still stood in the center, a stark sentinel. But something had changed. The air within the frame wasn't just dark, it was dense, a vortex of black so absolute it seemed to suck the light from his flashlight. The whispers were deafening here, forming almost words, taunting, echoing fragments of his own forgotten thoughts, snippets of Rhodes' lectures, Willie's babbling. They were stitching his own life into the tapestry of the ghost. This was the machine's core. The frame was the focal point. The resonance pattern was the program. And he, Lev Orlov, with the amber in his pocket, was the final component needed for, what? A permanent recording? A final dissolution? He understood the architect's design now. The man wasn't just a custodian of forgetting. He was an artist of negation. And Orlov's stubborn pursuit had delivered the last piece to the altar. A living, conscious witness to be consumed so that no witness would remain. He stepped towards the frame, the static screaming in triumph. He had two choices: become part of the ghost forever, or break the pattern with the only unpredictable variable left: himself. He reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the warm, screaming amber. This was not a search anymore. It was a sacrifice. But the question remained. A sacrifice to the ghost, or of the ghost? He took the final step, the black void within the frame swallowing the beam of his light, and raised the clenched fist, holding the last piece of the amber room. The chamber held its breath. His fist hovered at the threshold of the void within the frame. The amber bishop was a supernova of sensation in his hand, screaming with a silent, stored history. The whispering static in his mind wasn't a noise anymore. It was a pressure, a physical force, trying to pry his consciousness loose from its moorings. He could feel memories being siphoned away, the face of his first commanding officer, the taste of Moscow snow, the sound of his own name being called. They were being pulled into the dense black vortex like dust into a vacuum. The architect's machine was working perfectly. It was consuming him to complete the erasure. But in that moment of ultimate dissolution, a singular, brutal clarity cut through the psychic storm. It was not a memory, but an understanding. The machine needed a sacrifice. It demanded a witness to devour, to transform into static, to finalize the conversion of history into noise. But a sacrifice, by its very nature, implies a choice. The architect had designed this to be passive, a consumption. Orlov's final defiant act would be to make it active, to not be consumed, but to give. And to give not his sanity, but the one thing the machine was built around, the artifact itself. With a roar that was ripped from a place deeper than his lungs, a sound torn raw against the whispering silence. He didn't throw the amber bishop into the void. He slammed it with all his remaining strength into the ornate gilded wood of the frame itself. The impact was not physical. It was metaphysical. A shockwave of absolute silence exploded outward, a bubble that obliterated all sound, all whisper, all hum. For one infinite second, there was nothing. No memory, no static, no self. Then, light. Not the ghostly shimmer from before, but a violent, catastrophic eruption. The amber bishop didn't shatter. It discharged. Centuries of captured Baltic sunlight, decades of imperial pride, years of frantic fear, the entire condensed history of its existence. It unleashed itself in a silent, concussive blast of golden radiation. The light didn't illuminate the chamber. It became the chamber. It poured into the black vortex within the frame, not feeding it, but scouring it. The intricate resonance pattern, the invisible architecture of erasure woven into the stones and the air, met its antithesis, a pure, undiluted point of somethingness, a single defiant note of existence. The frame shrieked. Not a sound, but a vibration that shattered the remaining brick dust on the floor. The gilded wood blackened and cracked, not from heat, but from a sudden, accelerated antiquity, as if centuries of decay happened in a single heartbeat. The vortex collapsed. It didn't fade. It imploded, sucking the raging golden light inward for a final, terrible moment before vanishing with a psychic pop that left Orlov's ears ringing with a new, clean silence. He was thrown backwards, hitting the muddy ground, the breath knocked from him. The amber bishop was gone, vaporized, its essence spent. The whispering had stopped. The static in his head was gone, replaced by a hollow, ringing quiet that felt sacred. The machine was broken. He lay there, gasping, as the normal, oppressive darkness of the underground fort seeped back in. The frame stood cracked and ruined, just an old, broken piece of furniture. The hum of the earth was gone. The fort was just a cold, damp, empty space. He had not found the amber room. He had not brought a treasure back to Moscow. He had done something else. He had performed an exorcism. He had taken the last spark of the phenomenon and used it to short-circuit the machine built to destroy its memory. The ghost wasn't laid to rest. It was rendered inert, its voice canceled out by its own final, defiant shout. Days later, a different man boarded a transport plane from Cape Nigsberg to Moscow. Captain Lev Orlov's official report was a masterclass in obfuscation. It detailed a fruitless search, conjectured destruction by fire, cited the unverifiable testimony of the deceased road. It was a file full of dead ends and plausible conclusions. It was exactly what the bureaucracy needed to close the case. He mentioned nothing of architects, resonance patterns, or whispering forts. He presented the charred, broken frame as a meaningless artifact found in the rubble, of no intelligence value. He was debriefed, his hollow-eyed exhaustion put down to the rigors of a difficult post-war assignment. The mission was filed away as a failure, but in a small, bare apartment in Moscow, weeks later, the silence remained. It was not the silence of absence, but of a battle concluded. He would sometimes wake in the night, his hand going to the pocket where the bishop had been, feeling only the coarse fabric. He would feel a pang, not of loss, but of recognition. He had gone to find a treasure, and found a war for the soul of history itself. He had not returned with gold, but with a terrible knowledge that some things are not meant to be possessed, only witnessed, and that the most dangerous weapons are not those that destroy bodies, but those that seek to dissolve memory. The amber room was gone, not into the earth or the sea, but into the realm of uncreation. And he, Lev Orlov, was the sole witness to its final defiant act of being. In a world hurtling into a new era of secrets and lies, he carried a truth so profound it had to remain silent. It was a heavier burden than any golden panel, and it was his alone to bear. The hunt was over. The haunting had just begun, but now it was a quiet, personal thing, a scar on his perception of reality, a permanent reminder that he had stared into the architect's void and had answered it with a single, shattered point of light.